Hello, friends. Welcome to this lecture. My name is Athena, and I'm the woman behind Wild Willing Wisdom. In my traditional line of work, I do radical birth keeping and women's health and sovereignty coaching. But today we're going to talk about something a little bit different because I do think, and I hope that you will see by the end, how this actually does impact not only women's health and well-being, but our collective health and well-being and the future of our children and what that is going to look like for them if we head in this current trajectory. So what I'm specifically going to be talking about today is a review and brief analysis as we go along of a book titled From Transgender to Transhumanism, which is the manifesto of Martine Rothblatt. And I want to make it really clear that my intentions for providing you with this information is not to shame anybody or spread hate about anybody who aligns with an ideology in any direction, but more so to help elevate your awareness of what exactly the transhuman agenda is. I don't think a lot of people know that this is kind of what's going on behind the scenes, and it's really, really, really important. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, expanding our awareness of this agenda and how it relates to the current gender identity crisis that we're seeing unfolding, particularly in our youth. Now, who is the author of this manifesto? This is Martine Rothblatt. He is a biological male who identifies as a woman. He is the founder of United Therapeutics. This is sort of his more recent claim to fame, although he is also known for founding Sirius Radio, among other things. So he's been in the tech scene for kind of a long time. And United Therapeutics is a biotechnology company which invests in life-extending technologies and is currently experimenting with pig cloning and genetic modification. So already we are kind of seeing the sort of paradigm that this individual lives in regards to what is health and how do we cultivate it. His net worth is $330 million. All of these stats were taken off of the Forbes website and I think was updated fairly recently. He has also been listed on numerous lists of not only on 2020, but on other years as well, Forbes lists of America's top self-made women. And this is the manifesto that he wrote in 2011. It is titled From Transgender to Transhuman, and it can be purchased, or a copy of the PDF can also be found online if you're interested in diving deeper. Now, the way that I'm going to present the information to you today is basically what I've done is I've taken, I think, the most relevant and important quotes from the book directly, and I've rearranged them a little bit so that I can present them to you in categories that will make sense. Of course, you can accuse me of cherry picking. If this is your view, then I invite you to read the book yourself and come up with your own conclusions. Absolutely. So let's get started. The first section is I named actually after the name of his first chapter in the book, which is titled Billions of Sexes. So in this section, we're going to get a little bit into how he views gender and sex. Now, remember, this was written 10 years ago, and I think you'll see that a lot of the language and a lot of the beliefs and views that this person has cultivated has really found its way into the public sphere, if you will. So this is a sentence that got me the closest to understanding what his working definition is of gender. He says sexual identity, like nationality, is cultural and not genetic. That the expression of sexual identity is called gender. The expression of sexual identity is called gender. Now, I also want to point out to you that I noticed that while reading this book, he tends to use the word sex and gender interchangeably. So although he's sort of providing us with a definition here, I didn't really find that he adhered to it very strictly. Sex and gender, as I holistically interpreted his complete expression of it throughout the entire book, seemed to be one and the same. So let's get started with some basics. There are two sexes, male and female, right? Wrong. In fact, there is a continuum of sex types, ranging from very male to very female, with countless variations in between. This startling new notion is just now beginning to emerge from feminist thinking, scientific research, and a grassroots movement called transgenderism. In the future, labeling people at birth as male or female will be considered just as unfair as South Africa's now abolished practice of stamping Black or white on people's ID cards. So right away, you can see how he views the differentiation between male and female as a sort of apartheid that is objectively harmful to society and the way in which we function. Now, I want to back up a little bit and point out one thing that he mentions, which is that transgenderism is a grassroots movement. And although there's evidence to suggest that promoting transsexualism did begin as a down-up enterprise, it is not that way anymore, okay? We need to get really clear on understanding that transgenderism as a movement, as it currently exists, is not grassroots. It is being heavily funded in the billions of dollars by this class of humans, the sort of billionaire transgender identifying pharmaceutical pioneering class of humans who all happen to be biological males. And I think that that is really important to point out and remember. He goes on to say that the shape of one's genitals would appear to be a most arbitrary basis for determining to which of two fundamental human classes a person should belong. He says, it is true that there is a lot of biochemistry behind the set of genitals. Nevertheless, that biochemistry is as irrelevant as the genitals themselves. There is no hard and fast biochemical line that separates men from women, just a continuum of biochemical levels, with most women towards one end and most men towards the other, and much overlap and variance in between. Now, yes, we know that we all share the same hormones, that women have testosterone and men have estrogen. And so I can see why he wants to believe that this indicates that we are really just a spectrum of hormones, but that there is no hard and fast difference, and that our genitals are just shapes and they have no other implications for how the rest of our body works. Now, as a women's health educator, I can assure you that this is entirely incorrect, and that there are really grave consequences for attempting to manipulate or removing certain organ systems from our bodies that have to do with our sex-based biochemical makeup. Now, if you want more explanation on that, I highly encourage you to do some research. Of course, you can reach out to me if you are truly curious, and I can perhaps answer some questions for you. So let's continue. Chromosomes provide no logical, consistent basis for creating socio-legal categorizations of people into male and female. So even our chromosomes don't really mean anything in this paradigm. There are too many exceptional chromosomal combinations, and the net results of the chromosomes' hormone levels both vary continuously across all people, and they may be altered easily by pharmaceuticals. So another testimony to the paradigm in which this individual operates, which is that we can change our body with drugs if need be. Now, at no point in this entire book does he address, again, the serious health consequences that occur through pharmaceutical altering of our biochemical makeup. And they are very dramatic, really seriously diminish our quality of life. Even female hormonal birth control pills are very dangerous and can seriously impair a woman's quality of life. But that is for another conversation. So he says sex should really be the sum of behaviors we call gender. So here we have another kind of quasi definition of what he perceives sex to be. And sex should really be the sum of behaviors we call gender, an adjective, not a noun. So again, your sex is not a thing. It is an expression of the body. He goes on to say that gender exploration should come first through free choice, and that sex is just the label for one's chosen gender. If you're feeling confused, you should be. That's that's totally fine. Today we go about the matter of sex backwards. A male or female label is first imposed upon us without choice. We are then trained to adopt a set of appropriate gender behaviors, whether we like them or not. Now, what I want to say about this is that I do agree that I don't think it's a good idea that we are training our children to fill the roles of gender stereotypes. I think that is what is actually truly harmful. It should be okay for boys to want to wear pink or play with dolls just as much as it should be okay for girls to want to wear blue overalls and play with trucks. That is the paradigm that I think we need to be breaking out of for true creative liberation. But then he goes on to say that a male or female label is first imposed upon us without choice. Now, I want to be really clear about this. We are not labeled male or female. If we are sticking to the traditional working definitions of what sex is, sex cannot be assigned to you. You are born into a sex. You can choose not to identify with it. You can choose to hate it. You can choose to love it. But it is the reality of your earthly existence in this life. And so I do not agree that male or female, that those words serve as labels that are imposed upon us. He says, society's quest for individual expression is well served by viewing sex as a choice of chromatic identity. It is disserved by insisting on sex as a lifelong trap. Now, I think this last statement is extremely subjective because what I'm hearing from this author is that he feels that his sex was a lifelong trap and that it serves only to entrap other humans. This is a little chart that he included in his book to sort of illustrate what a chromatic sexual identity could look like. Upon reading it a little bit into it with a little bit more detail, I found it quite strange as most of the descriptions have to do with sex. The color green might indicate a person who is equally aggressive or nurturing, who does not feel sexy. The color orange can be assigned to a person who may be non-nurturing and self-described as equally aggressive and erotic. So there's something strange to me personally about this whole chart and how this individual is trying to categorize people into this spectrum of color. But I also want to note that I think the use of color has relevance because, as we know, a lot of these gender fluid movements do associate themselves with rainbows of color, right? And it works really well to attract a kind of friendly, loving psychology that appeals to children especially. Sexually, we are not men and women, but are shades of these colors: purple, orange, green, and brown. Some of us are white with indecision, and others of us are black with dynamic gender complexity. And all of us can change our gender during our life. Far from being trapped for life as men or women, we can individually evolve our chromatic sexual identities as our minds grow and develop in interaction with life. Anatomically, we may have penises or vaginas, testes or ovaries, but sexually, we are a rainbow of color and a spectrum of gender. Now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into some of his words on what he considers to be the apartheid of sex. He says, we live under an apartheid of sex. At birth, we are cast into a sex type based on our genitals. From there, we are brainwashed, he says, into a sex type appropriate culture called gender. Now, again, I do agree with this a little bit. I can see many ways in which our obsession with gender roles in our society really does serve as an actual trap to those who feel like they have to fit in certain boxes based on their biological makeup. He then goes on to say, though, that women are allowed to mimic, okay, women can mimic, but not too much, the powerful entrenchment of men. So women can take on more aggressive, manly roles, but are not allowed to take it too far, right? Because we have to be womanly and docile. But then he says men who try to be womanish face the kind of vicious scorn reserved for traitors, or the humiliation accorded masters who identified with slaves. I felt that this statement was very bold, especially in comparison to how many fewer words he gave the example about women who tried to be mannish. I, again, am totally projecting my own thoughts onto the author, but I'm seeing another indicator of a man who feels very trapped by his biological reality and maybe knows a little bit more than we think about what it means to try to be womanish as a man in our culture. And I want you to think about too, what does it even mean to be womanish? And what does it even mean to be mannish? And if we kind of abolished those ideas of what woman and man are, what expressions of woman and man are, wouldn't it then be okay for a woman to be as nurturing or aggressive as she wanted? And it would be okay for a man to be just as nurturing and as aggressive as he wanted? Should we not want to strive for that level of basic acceptance? The apartheid of sex is too ancient to be dismantled overnight, but there are concrete steps that can start the process of liberating humanity's future. So among them, step one, a little confusing, again, adopting resolutions in the psychological and medical community to the effect that sex in humans is a continuous variable. While male and female categories are useful to group biological characteristics for medical purposes, these same categories have socially detrimental effects when used outside the field of medicine. So this is an example in which he contradicts himself a little bit as he sort of acknowledges that male and female differences are relevant for our medical realities, but that at the same time, we need to encourage the medical community to adopt the opinion that sex is a continuous variable, as he says. The second point is to adopt laws that prohibit the classification of people according to sex type. Again, he contradicts himself, except for bona fide medical purposes. So does sex difference matter or does it not? The third point, and this one is very important to remember, adopting educational curricula and entertainment programming that encourages the concept of self-defined sex and flexible gender behaviors. Now, remember what I talked about earlier about how the transgender movement is not a grassroots movement. There is billions of dollars being funded into this movement, and they are specifically targeting younger and younger children. This is why we see these themes coming up in educational settings and also in their entertainment. As we break free of the chains of sexual apartheid, we will establish a new human culture of unparalleled creativity in personal development. So this is something that he really emphasizes multiple times in the book, is that he views this as a sort of liberation from constraint and a form of creativity, the most heightened expression of creativity that humans can achieve, apparently. From Homo sapiens, he says, literally meaning the wise man, we shall emerge as our new species, persona creatis, or the creative person. From the subjugation of women shall emerge the sensitization of men, and from the apartheid of sex shall evolve the freedom of gender. All that will be left of a male or female difference will be reproductive systems that social choice and biotechnology can make available to any person regardless of anatomical birthright. Sex will be creativity, not destiny. So what he's implying here is that our reproductive abilities will become a social and biotechnical choice that can be made available to any person. we'll talk about that more in another section. So here's some section notes for you. Feel free to screenshot any of these slides, either for your own learning, to share. If you are on Instagram, you can tag me at Wild Willing Wisdom. I'd love to see your support and what you have to say about my findings. So here are some notes for us. Again, the loose definitions that are not very clear in my opinion. He believes that gender is the expression of sexual identity and that sex is the sum of behaviors we call gender. Biochemistry and genitalia are irrelevant and or easily altered by pharmaceuticals. Anatomically, we have penises or vaginas. Sexually, we are a rainbow of color and a spectrum of gender. He believes we must dismantle the apartheid of sex by first adopting resolutions in the medical community that acknowledge but mainly deny sex differences, and adopt laws that prohibit the classification of people according to sex. So this will include things like birth certificates and such. And then, of course, adopt educational and entertainment programming that encourages this ideology. Our next section has to do with language. I think we're all very familiar with where this, the progress of language and changing language stands at current. Again, I want to remind you, this was written 10 years ago. So let's see what he had to say then. Thinking and talking about sex is unavoidable because language is full of sex. The dialogue today is dimorphic, but we have the ability to infuse our language with gender-inclusive concepts that liberate all speakers, present and as yet unborn. We must be wary of those who would serve as thought police, demanding compliance with sexually dimorphic language and behavior. Now, I thought that this was very interesting as he's warning of thought police, while seemingly not taking into consideration how his own demands for his worldviews sort of begins to fulfill the role of thought police. Now, to be fair, and I did include them in this presentation, there are a couple quotes in the book in which he implies that he does believe that, for example, after the apartheid crumbles, if a woman wants to be called a mother and a father wants to be called a father, that we should respect those requests and call them as such. But again, I find that I am not really sure how seriously to take those sentiments, as he contradicts himself multiple places throughout his manifesto. So he goes on to say that sexually dimorphic pronouns likely began as a way to show more respect to men and less respect to women. As an aside, he provided no evidence as to why he believes this. And I myself am not really quite sure where this idea would come from as well. But if anyone out there has information to provide me, I am certainly willing to receive it. Okay, today, sexually dimorphic pronouns operate as a way to respect those who conform to apartheid and to disrespect those who don't. When people refer to a transgendered looking person as it, they usually have a tone of disgust in their voice, as if to say, this is not really a person. The bigot thinks they don't have a sex. That makes them a thing, an it. Language needs to evolve so that people can enjoy linguistic respect without having to declare a male or female sexual identity. Now, I do want to make it very clear that I, of course, do not agree in any way that we should be referring to people as its or as things. Every human life is sacred, and it really should go without saying. But I do understand why he is bringing this example to the forefront. He then provides some examples that do loosely mimic some of the more popular ones today, replacing his and her with air, replacing he and she with a, replacing him and her with m. In a sexually dimorphic world, a mother is a female parent and a father is a male parent. But what happens to these definitions after the fall of sexual apartheid? There are a number of possibilities. One is that the terms mother and father will become archaic, replaced with the phrases my parent Sue or my parent Steve. Another option is that the terms mother and father will retain their ancient association with the more nurturing and more dominating parent, respectively, but will become disconnected from genital-based sex roles. In this case, a kid might say, I love my dad and she loves me. So what he is implying there is that the she will be associated with the nurturing parent and the he will be associated with the dominating parent. And so in this example, he is describing a father who has taken on the more nurturing role of the mother. Sexual orientation in the third millennium will evolve towards a multisexual model because male or female sex types will fade away. Persons with any genitals will feel free to identify themselves as the colors, as well as descriptors such as femme, butch, tough, tender, or trans. With this continuum of sexual possibilities, gay, straight, and even bisexual labels will lose all meaning. People will fall in love with people. So again, stripping away the language that provides clarity about our biochemical realities. So some notes on language: sexually dimorphic pronouns serve those who conform to apartheid and disrespect those who don't. We should infuse language with gender inclusive concepts. Labels associated with sexual orientation will also be erased. Let's review now some of the common legal concerns that come up in regards to a society in which sex doesn't matter. So we'll start with birth certificates. He proposes that birth certificates present a special case of government mandated sex information. Here, the government could also argue that this information must be collected for health and medical reasons. These same kinds of arguments were raised for specifying race on birth certificates and were found totally specious. This next line is peculiar. Whether a child is brought up Black, white, or race-free is a parental option. So this felt a little concerning to me because it also illustrates the further levels of this thinking, which is that in erasing biological reality, we are also erasing another layer of humanity that transcends whether or not you are male or female. We're also erasing the need to value our lineages and our ancestors and our genetic makeups in regards to where we come from in the world, what race we are. And he also, as you can see, is implying that that is just as much of a choice as whether or not we want to acknowledge our biological sex. Neither the parents nor the kids need a birth certificate to tell them what they look like, he argues. Similarly, when a kid is brought up male, female, or sex-free, should be a parental option, at least until the children express their own gender will. No one needs a birth certificate to tell them what their genitals are. He says it is also medically inaccurate to specify sex as opposed to genitals on a birth certificate. So here we are again, in which he is contradicting himself a little bit because it is not clear what he believes counts as medically relevant when it comes to our sex. With regard to incarceration, it is claimed that sex-separate prisons are needed to either protect women from rape or to prevent childbirth under conditions of imprisonment. He offers that the solution to sex and prison is strict supervision, solitary confinement for sexual assault, and education. I also think it's worth noting that his solution for those who assault sexually another is solitary confinement, which would involve separation. Classifying people, he says, by sex so that they can be incarcerated accordingly has done nothing to prevent jailhouse rape. A multi-sex prison environment may in fact be more rehabilitative in that it better resembles the real world. I don't think there is anything about jail as we know it in America to resemble the real world. I personally think that we should consider abolishing the current system in favor of systems that actually work to rehabilitate those who have fallen into those circumstances. He also proposes that the concern about childbirth in a multi-sexed prison is readily resolved with mandatory injected contraceptives for all inmates. Just letting you sit with that. Also note how he says that they will use either they will use either anti-androgens or progesterone based on a medical exam. I wonder why that is. Recently, a new quasi-government justification for sex typing has arisen. So this is in regards to sex segregation in sports. He says that in a world free from the apartheid of sex, there would be no sex testing. He's referring specifically to the Olympics, because there would be no sex segregated athletic competition. Superficially, this might seem to disadvantage women because taller, stronger, more muscular men will win all the prizes. In fact, sex segregated athletics exist to avoid male humiliation to losing to women. This is his theory, that we separate male and female sports because if we didn't, men would be humiliated at losing to women. Okay. His biggest example in supporting this idea is that he claims that when women first ran the Boston Marathon in 1964, the best time was an hour and a half behind the best male time. 20 years later, the two sexes' time difference by only 11 minutes. Similar trends exist in Olympic track and swimming events. Now, I do agree that in seeing what is possible for us, we can manifest higher standards for our own performance and our own experiences. However, I do not agree that there does not exist a glass ceiling of sorts, if you will, that women will just never be able to excel beyond because, let's face it, we have physical limitations. And now, yes, there are going to be some women out there who can compete with men, especially if you are taking a women's sports best participant and measuring her up with the worst participant of men's sports. Then of course it's going to look a little bit different. But overall, if you put both sexes together in a mass competition, I wonder who is going to win the awards most of the time. Now we move on to the bathrooms. He says restroom rape is a serious problem today, even with sex-separate bathrooms. It is pure speculation as to whether unisex bathrooms would increase restroom rape or decrease it. By converting a women's space attractive to rapists into a non-sex public space. So in a way there, he's subliminally arguing that by having a restroom that only women can enter, it actually becomes attractive to rapists because they know that only women will be in there versus having a bathroom in which men and women will be in there. And that does sound like a valid argument, right? Because there are going to be other men around who theoretically could protect the women who might be under attack by these predators. He says, generally, rapists prefer seclusion. The thought that persons of any sex can enter any restroom at any time should discourage sexual violence in restrooms. Note, again, this is a man who's speaking. None of this takes into any consideration all of the many other concerns that women have about sharing their spaces with men that go beyond just whether or not they feel at risk of being assaulted. He goes on to say that heightened security, such as better night lighting, is one of the best tools to diminish rape. The best tools. For about the cost of a single modern urinal, each public restroom could also be equipped with a continuous loop camera high above the exit door. So again, think about the paradigm that this individual lives in. Instead of creating a world in which rape diminishes because we don't have so many effed up, sick people walking around, we're just going to add more lighting and more surveillance. So the notes on these legal concerns include the idea that birth certificates should remove sex identification because it is irrelevant. The solution to mixed sex prisons is increased surveillance, solitary confinement, education, and forced contraceptive injections. Mixed sex sports is not problematic because women can compete at the same capacity as men. Unisex bathrooms simply require security cameras and better lighting. I really do find the last point quite hilarious. Okay, let's move on to the science. He goes into a lot of depth discovering science that he feels supports these views. I tried to pull out the most relevant examples. This is a little bit more of a denser section, so I'll try to explain it in the best way that I can. So he begins by asserting that sex began accidentally, that it is merely just random mutations about 1 billion years ago that gave ancient asexual organisms the ability to include genetic material from one organism of that species before reproducing. Today, we call the organism that contributes genetic material male, and the organism that both contributes and includes their genetic material female. This does not always mean that the female actually nurtures the offspring. So he provides some examples about these gender constructs that he believes we should break out of to some extent, which I also agree with to some extent. He says that female seahorses, for example, deposit eggs into a male brood pouch where they are fertilized and incubated, and that female pipefishes glue eggs along a male's underside, and midwife toads wrap eggs around the male's legs. So yes, there are examples in nature of creatures that are not humans who have their own unique ways of procreating that don't follow human-based gender stereotypes. Second, there are a seemingly limitless number of variations of sexual types. Many species are male and female simultaneously or sequentially. The slipper limpet, for example, lives in oyster beds and gradually changes from male to hermaphrodite to female in old age. On the other hand, certain Caribbean coral reef fish start out female and die as males. Many types of fish, such as butter hamlets and swordtails, change sex back and forth to balance the ratio of males to females currently around them. Now, these examples are quite fascinating and quite romantic in its own way, but I think that we need to remember that humans are not slipper limpets or swordtails. We are just not. It is not part of our genetic makeup to be able to gracefully change from male to female in these ways. We need to force that kind of change through pharmaceutical intervention that has dramatically harmful consequences as a result, because our bodies are not meant to take on that kind of alteration. He also references work that was done in 1990 by Johns Hopkins University sexologist, Dr. John Money. He did some experiments in which male baboons were made to serve as surrogate mothers for zygotes fertilized in test tubes. The embryos grew in a fatty cavity near the intestines and were delivered by cesarean section as healthy infants. And I put air quotations around healthy, because there are many human babies who come into the world merely alive and are declared healthy. Now, if all beings were coming into the world and growing up as healthy, I don't think that we would be in the variety of messes that we are as a society today. So when you hear anyone within the pharmaceutical paradigm or the modern medical paradigm use the word healthy, I want you to drop the bar really low as to what they believe healthy is. In a similar vein, he says, Dr. Money reported on ectopic pregnancies in women whose wombs had previously been removed and on zygotes that implanted themselves in the small intestine and grew their own placenta, with the implication that a man could have carried the embryo as well. All of these cases strongly suggest that even the nurturance of a child with technological help is not an absolute biological imperative of any one subclass of humans. So he's using these examples to support the idea that with technology, anyone can choose to procreate or nurture a child. Further scientific advances in the areas of genetic engineering and neonatal care foretell the likelihood that a zygote might be formed from the chromosomes of two women or of two men, assuming the necessary biochemical codes that enable cellular union are learned. Once this scientific threshold is passed, the axiom that men impregnate will no longer be strictly true. Of course, he says, one need not wait for the science fiction scenario to occur. I think it's very curious that he calls it science fiction, because this is quite literally what we are heading for. He explains, as long as sperm banks and in vitro fertilization exists, the relevance of men's monopoly on impregnation disappears. Impregnation becomes a commodity. As long as surrogate motherhood is legally available, the relevance of women's monopoly on gestation disappears. Gestation becomes a commodity. So again, he's pointing out that these realities already exist in their own early iterations of the full expanse of the vision in regards to, or as it relates to sperm banks and in vitro fertilization and surrogacy. So the notes on this section include his belief that sex dimorphism in humans is simply a mutation. The other note is notes include that there are examples in nature of animal species that are capable of changing their sex, that with technological assistance, the growing and birthing of a fetus will not be exclusive to females, and that impregnation and gestation are currently and will continue to be a commodity. Okay, so let's step into another plane of being. This section is called cyberspace, in which he describes that computers and telecommunication are likely to play an important role in dismantling the apartheid of sex. In in-person meetings, we only reinforce sexual stereotypes, right? Because we are things that can be touched and hugged and felt. But in cyberspace, you can pretend to be any sex that you want. An exciting opportunity on the horizon is the merging of virtual reality into cyberspace to enable face-to-face dynamics without sexual conformity. This new frontier, which he actually calls cybersex, is an excellent proving ground for the multisexual world of the 21st century. With ever-falling prices of computer chips, it won't be long before a piece of electronic clothing will be available for every part of the body. The display screens of tomorrow are little pieces of plastic that we will set before our eyes. Wireless communication links, as used in mobile and remote controlled devices, will provide two-way connection between the electronic clothing and a ubiquitous wireless network. The electronic clothing will even be able to give the wearer the sensation of being touched or squeezed, and even of warmth or coolness. So this completely erases the necessity to have in-person human connection, because your clothes, your cyber clothes, will merely mimic what it feels like to receive a warm hug or a cool kiss on the cheek. When cyberspace is enhanced by virtual reality, there are innumerable opportunities to try on genders as part of cybersexual explorations. First, there is creating your image. Now you are your own. Your behavior, attitude, and conversation are where your creativity and personality come into play. But you don't have to play the macho man or shy guy, and you can be any kind of girl you want to be. Dance by yourself, dance with another, touch a person without caring about sex. Tomorrow, try another gender. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, because all you have to say is log off and you are gone. This is also playing out, I'm sure it's obvious to you, in the way that we approach gaming nowadays, and all of the virtual communities that have been created around building avatars of ourselves. The cybersex scenario is within the technology's 10-year reach. Intermediate steps, such as computer video conferences, with users choosing and editing their on-screen display, already come bundled with Apple computers. All of this technology will be used for sex. And I included this line in here because, again, this was written 10 years ago, and it's only been in the past year that we've really seen a surge in this use of video conferencing, and not only video conferencing, but in remote learning. Now, these things, the existence of these solutions to our crisis, current crisis as it stands, is not an accident. These have been planned to be more further incorporated into our existence for a very long time. So notes on cyberspace. Cyber sex will allow you to be anyone you want to be. Technology will mimic the experience of in-person connection. So true in-person connection will be unnecessary. Current technologies such as video conferencing will be used in the future for alternate cyberspace realities. So as we spend more and more time in these alternate cyberspace realities, what does that mean for the avatars that we take on in place of our real human forms? Well, they're going to have to develop a consciousness, of course. This is part of the transhuman vision. He says, with extensions of the regenerative medicine technology being used today to grow skin, blood vessels, and organs, it will be possible to grow an entire fresh body outside of a womb, and to write into its vacant brain the synchronized mind file derived originally from an MRI scan of your brain. Ectogenesis, the growth of a body outside of a womb, would produce an adult-sized person in just 20 months. I feel very confident that they are experimenting with ectogenesis at this time. We know that they are doing so in Israel, and of course with his company as well. If you spend a little time on the internet, you can find some reports that have leaked out about how those experiments are going. So uploaded transhuman minds will certainly avail themselves of the entire rainbow palette of sexual identity. It will be fun and creative, and you won't face the obstacle of a penis screaming, but you're a man. However, they will face a more severe barrier, which is people pointing to the computer screen and screaming, but you're a machine. He acknowledges that a common public view is that God or nature endowed only humans with a human soul, and that consciousness is its earthly manifestation. Of course, he does not agree with this view. He says that in order to definitely challenge the prevailing human-centered consciousness paradigm, it will be necessary to prove that an uploaded transhuman embodied in software is in fact consciousness. One of the solutions that he offers for identifying consciousness in computers, other than the one that I have provided here for you, is that he proposed that psychologists can be trained in interrogating computers or avatars or AI in order to assess whether or not they believe that those systems are evolved enough to be considered a conscious being. He also asserts that a good sign of the humanness or autonomy of an avatar is that they choose their own sex and display their own gender. Such an avatar would be both transgendered and transhuman. Transgendered because they choose their own gender, and transhuman because they identify with being human, even though they are not made of flesh. Avatar sexuality is a key bridge from transgender to transhuman. It makes cerulean clear that sexual identity is limitless in variety and detachable from reproduction. And by making that point, it simultaneously demonstrates that human identity is limitless in variety and detachment from reproduction. If you can accept that a person without a penis can peaceably live life as she pleases, including as a man, then you should be able to accept that a person without a physical form can peaceably live life as they please, including as a human. And I think the wording of this is very relevant because it does imply that those who do not agree with this ideology are unable to let others live as they please. And I find that to be very divisive because although I do not agree with a lot of this ideology, it doesn't mean that I don't know how to let people live peaceably as they wish. So for example, if somebody is born a female and believes that she was born in the wrong body, I don't necessarily agree that it's possible to be born in the wrong body, but I can accept that you can believe that and that you can live your life peaceably as you wish, and that's totally fine. What I don't agree with is enriching this pharmaceutical paradigm and mutilating our own bodies to achieve something that is unattainable because we hate the bodies that we live in so deeply. The other point that I wanted to make about this is that you can see that what he's insinuating here is that if we can get people to accept this ideology at the base level, then we can get them to accept this ideology as it progresses at the next levels. So we need to remember that as the movement exists in its current iteration, the purpose is to drive it forward into a transhuman existence in which we become cyborgs of some kind. And it actually is much more involved with that. Much more involved than that, and I would try to provide some resources in the video description that can help you continue on with your study of this if it so interests you. So again, thinking about where your boundaries are, what you are willing to accept, what you are willing to not accept, the importance of maintaining our understanding of biological realities while also respecting how other people want to express their personal beliefs and maintaining respect for that. We need to consider this holistically, okay? We need to think about it as the agenda is being presented to us and unfolding, and also taking into consideration humanity and knowing that those affected at the bottom are not the source of this problem, that it's coming from the top. So some notes on avatar consciousness. Transhumanism aims to challenge human-centered or God consciousness. A good sign of humanness is an avatar that can choose its own sex and gender. Computer avatars may be considered both transgender and transhuman. Accepting transgender ideology paves the way for acceptance of transhuman ideology. That last one is certainly a little bit of my own interpretation as I just described it to you for full transparency. So our last main section here in this lecture is right to the meat. It's about his words on transhumanism. Will technology stop at transgenderism? If a century or so of technology has demolished millennia of absolute sexual duality, what might another few decades of exponentially growing technology do? Sex lies at the heart of biology, yet in transcending biology, technology gave us an explosion of sexual identities. So as technology continues to transcend biology, what next can we expect beyond the apartheid of sex? An explosion of human identities? The answer in a word is transhumanism. We can define transhumans as people who have hybridized themselves with computational technology as part of humanity's effort to control its evolutionary destiny. One can even think of the prefix trans in transhuman as an acronym for transbiologically receptive, adaptational, and noetically synthetic. Hence, a transhuman is a person, an entity with human legal rights who is receptive to transcending biological limitations and is adapting in this direction by developing synthetic noetic pathways. A noetic pathway is similar to a neural pathway, but refers more to the thoughts than to the neural substrates for the thoughts. Transhumans welcome one mind, many forms, the way transgenders welcome one mind, many genders. As a society's enumerators adapted to multiple races, they will adapt to multiple sexes and ultimately to multiple forms. The biologist will insist that members of a common species be capable of producing fertile offspring. And so it is for transhumans, he says. The persona creatus race. Reproduction will no longer necessarily occur, however, via joined DNA. Instead, people of flesh will upload into software the contents and processes of their minds. Once we have thus digitally cloned our minds, new digital people can be produced by combining some of our mindware with some of our partner's mindware. Just as technology redefined biology in terms of sexual identity, it will next redefine biology in terms of human identity. The first step in extending the lessons of transgenderism to transhumanism is to recognize the continuity of life across substrates, just like the continuity of gender across body types. It is no more the genitals that make the gender than it is the substrate that makes the person. We must respect the personhood of any entity that thinks consciously, therefore I am consciously, just as we must respect the sexual identity of any being that feels this gender, therefore I am this gender. The second step is to prevent the construction of an apartheid of form. This means conscious entities, be they flesh, synthetics, or hybrid, must be treated equally and indifferently under the law. So the notes on this include his idea that transhumans are people who hybridize themselves with technology. They welcome one mind, many forms. Reproduction will involve uploading minds into software where they will be combined to create digital offspring. And that we must expand transgenderism into transhumanism by recognizing the continuity of life across substrates and allow all conscious entities to be treated equally under the law. In closing, these are some final words from Martine. We cannot be surprised that transhumanism arises from the groins of transgenderism. So again, he provides many examples throughout his book that affirm that transhumanism is the offspring of transgenderism. Transgenderism does not exist in a bubble. The push that we are seeing for this ideology does not exist in a vacuum. It is serving the purpose of this class. As reasoning beings, he says, we must welcome this further transcendence of arbitrary biology and embrace in solidarity all conscious life. Freedom of gender is therefore the gateway to a freedom of form and to an explosion of human potential. First comes the realization that we are not limited by our anatomy at all. The mind is the substance of humanity, and mind is deeper than matter. So there's a lot of, I find that there's a lot of fantasy in this ideology. There's a really strong belief that we are our thoughts to such an extent that we can actually manipulate our reality as it exists within this human earth existence just by thinking it to be so, and that is going to be the source of our liberation and ultimate creativity. The outcome of this gender awakening will be a new species, a new transhumanity, one that has its fundamental purpose, the assurance of a healthy, fulfilling life for all who value that right. So I want to leave you with something to think about. And I want you to consider, obviously we talked about so much in this lecture, but it really struck me, those words in his final statement, which involve the pursuit of a healthy and fulfilling life. Now, certainly I can accept that we might have different opinions on what it takes to cultivate a truly healthy and fulfilling life. But I wonder if that's not really the debate we should be having. I wonder if the debate actually lies in whether or not it's morally okay for this very tiny number of humans with a very astronomical amount of power to be dictating what the future of our existence is going to look like, to be insisting that the best thing for us is to demolish biological reality, physically, surgically, chemically manipulate and castrate the bodies of our youth so that they age into an adult population that ultimately has to rely on uploading their consciousness into technology, because the bodies that they will be living in will be so tired and so unwell that they will no longer be able to live a fully expressed, vibrant life, because it just won't be possible. You cannot operate on that many drugs with entire organ systems removed for a sustainable amount of time in a way that is vital, in a way in which you are thriving and not merely surviving under this illusion that by doing so, you have somehow changed sex. because that is not possible. And we need to remember that. I want you to remember that there is no such thing as transitioning. I know some people will think it's hateful for me to say that, but it's actually just truth. Again, if you want to believe that it is possible to be born in the wrong body, if you want to believe that you are a sex that you were not granted or formed into at birth, that is entirely your right. And I honor you on that path. But let's not pretend, again, that by surgically manipulating our bodies, by removing organs, and by filling it with pharmaceutical drugs, that means you have magically changed sex. Okay? That's not possible. And now we can see very clearly that the direction that this manipulation of our reality is taking us in is one of a very sophisticated technological existence in which you don't even need to occupy flesh because you'll just be uploaded into an avatar. This is the life that we are heading for. And again, I wonder if the question is not whether or not that is truly going to be our liberation, our highest expression of creativity. I wonder if the question is it okay that this billionaire class of pharmaceutical representatives and entrepreneurs are designing this for us without our consent, are funneling billions of dollars into manipulating children to align with this ideology, unbeknownst to the parents who send them off to the organizations that are providing these programs. We need to awaken to the reality that is taking place. This is just one small example in a way of what is actually going on. Again, I'm going to try really hard to gather a lot of resources for you and include them in the video description so that you can continue on in heightening your awareness of what is going on, and so that you are better able to see through the veil, if you will, and start making changes in how you interact with your reality, your society, your family, your social groups, your activism, how you raise your children. This is really important. This is going to, I think, make or break what it means to really maintain our sense of humanity and what we think it looks like as it stands. Thank you so much for watching. If you have respectful comments, questions, information, I am around. Please find a way to reach out to me. You can either leave a comment, you can go onto my website at wildwillingwisdom.com and get in touch with me there. You can also find me on Instagram at wildwillingwisdom. Please follow along there. I have lots of resources, not only about transhumanism, but also about how to cultivate true health, vitality, holistic living, how to birth babies in sovereignty, and how to take back your own health and sovereignty in your womanhood. And one more thing before you go, if you are interested in not only transhumanism, but also in the technocracy that seems to be taking over our society as we move forward down this path, please check out the link in the description and download my Mind, Body, and Spirit Guide to Digital Sovereignty. I have over 35 tips in there regarding protecting you and your family from EMF exposure, blue light, digital privacy, and of course, the enmeshment of humans with technology. So please check that out. I hope you have an amazing day. Love you so much. Keep doing the good work.